Thanks,
Gary. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We've got an hour packed full of great cover crop presentations. Welcome, my name is Sarah Carlson. I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa. I do a lot of work with farmers, learning more about how they're using cover crops and helping them hopefully do on-farm research to better, choose which cover crops work and crack the nut on how to make cover crops work with maybe tillage systems. That's an area that I hope we can get a little bit into today. So I'm just going to have each farmer come up and talk a little bit more, introduce themselves. We'll keep their presentations to about 15 minutes, and then we'll, at the end, have time for questions. So Doug, you want to start?
All right, thank you, Sarah. My name's Doug Adams, and I'm from Humboldt County, Iowa, up in north central Iowa. Started using cover crops a few years ago, so I put together a few slides. Started farming in 1993, so I've been farming for a little over 20 years now. Started transitioning into our no-till, strip-till system about the year 2000 when I started getting my own equipment. And I started using cover crops the fall of 2012, and right now I've got about 500 acres of cover crops out there. So the majority of my own acres have cover crops. I've also got some that are in a partnership with another neighbor that we're hoping to add some cover crops to this next year. So up in north central Iowa, a lot of times we get told, cover crops just don't work up here. It's too cold. We're not going to get enough growth out of them. But it is something. If you want to do it, it will work. The first picture here is typical when we're getting ready to plant our corn. This is probably getting ready to do the burn down pass. Not a lot of growth out there. This is cereal rye. But if you want to wait and terminate a little bit later, you can get a lot of growth out of that cereal rye. And then I like to repeat it annually to improve my soil health. So like I said, I started in 2012 putting on some cereal rye after soybean harvest. First of all, I wanted to see what a cover crop could offer. As well as farm, I work at the NRCS office as a technician there in Humboldt. So I thought if I'm going to be talking to farmers about this, I need to get my hands into it too. And as a farmer, if you don't do it now, you're probably going to have to wait another year to get another chance at it and stuff. So it's just best to plan ahead and be ready. You will learn something the first year so you can make it better in the second year. So some of the first things that I did learn was I should have seeded immediately after harvest. I waited a little bit waiting for cost share and stuff to get lined up. Missed some rain and some early growth. There's a lot of growing degrees right after harvest. You also have to use some caution if you're using some 32% nitrogen with your burn down in the spring. So 2014, I decided to start changing it up a little bit by throwing a few extra things into my cover crop. So we tried some oats, crimson clover, and I think some radish in that mix. I usually have radish and rye as my typical standby. I've added some rape to it as well now. The other side is my standby cereal rye, and that's where I go with soybeans. And so what happens if it rains and you don't terminate as originally planned? Well, the rye will continue to grow. So the photo before, the rye was about 8 inches tall, and that's about the time when I'm getting ready to terminate my cereal rye to plant soybeans into it. But May of 2015, it started to rain, and it rained every week, and that rye doubled in height about every week. So on the 21st, it was about waist high, and I'm thinking it's about as tall as it's ever going to get, but it continued to grow. And on June 2nd, I rolled in there with the planter and planted that standing green. So that's probably the best experience of my farming career right there, was to ever get a chance to do that. So if you ever have a chance, I'd tell you to try it. It's pretty fun. So it would have been great to put the planter in the shed after that, because it was wiped completely clean after going through all that rye. That rye provided an excellent seed bed. This is another picture. It wasn't the actual picture there, but when I started pulling in the field, I always like to dig and see how the different conditions are. I couldn't find the seed, and I thought, well, I know it's planting. The monitor says it's planting. It was actually going in deeper because the soil was more mellow with all those rye roots. So I was very impressed with that. I was a little concerned about the rye shading the soybeans, so we had some rollers come in. A lot of the conventional farmers up in our area like to roll to smash the root balls as well as to knock the rocks back into the ground. So we rolled that tall rye, and that put about 3 inches of rye mulch on the ground. Those beans came right through that, and as you can see, clear through July, no weeds were growing. I did put down a pre-emergent herbicide, which is my typical program, but it was the rye straw that was doing all the work for me that year. That year, all I did was spray it around the outside edge of the field where the airplane didn't get the rye as thick. I sprayed a post-emerge pass there, but the rest of the field stayed clean, clear through harvest. And as you can see, no weeds in there. I came back and I strip tilled a head of corn, so I put the strips in the fall, and the rye residue was real dry and brittle, just spread right apart and didn't affect anything that fall. Oh, and the yields were just as good as my other bean yields that year. We've had some really good bean yields up there. North Central Iowa, we don't grow great beans, 40 to 50 is typical. That was 58 that year, so we had really good yields that year. And so I've decided to continue to try growing that rye for my weed control as well. So 2015, we flew on some more cover crops, and again, we strip tilled that field there. That strip tilling was seeded a little bit earlier, as you can see. The one with the rye on it, I actually spread some rye again after harvest. And when you have that much rye straw on the ground, it's a little bit more of a challenge to get the next rye cover crop going, it seems. The spring of 2016, here's the corn coming up. As you can see, the rye residue, when you terminate your rye early, you don't have a lot of residue that you're going to be fighting with the corn, unless you accidentally skip a row when you're spraying, so that's kind of a test strip to see what could happen. Not a big deal. You can either spray that, before the corn emerges, or if you do have Roundup Ready corn, which if you are trying cover crops for the first time, I would suggest having Roundup Ready corn just in case you have something escape. You have that option to come back in and clean it up with. And again, this is how we roll the rye down. A lot of times we roll it right after planting when it's still pretty green. This last year, the rye was shorter, so it didn't quite lay down, so we actually came back and rolled it after the beans actually came up, and the rye was pretty much brown, but it still did a good job of laying that rye down. This last fall, I had the opportunity to get a Hagee up to do some interseeding, so they seeded towards the end of August. Great growth. Of course, last year was a year that you couldn't mess up a cover crop, with all the rain we got that fall. This was rape, vetch, and cereal rye, a bushel and a half of cereal rye. On the rest of my fields, my plan was to come back and spread it with some fertilizer to kind of offset the higher costs that I did do with the Hagee. But the rains kept coming, it kind of pushed harvest back, and so I was losing those growing degree days, so I decided to call on the airplanes. It was about the same cost, so the airplanes flew it on, which of course then turned us into the drought that we had. It quit raining after we seeded, which you don't want to happen, but we did get our harvest done then. On my soybeans, corn stalks going to soybeans, I've upped my rates to a bushel and a half just to kind of get more mass down on the ground for weed control. If it's going to corn, I just keep it at the bushel rate. And then I usually add radish or rape in all my mixes. So everybody asks me, so what's my cover crop going to look like in the spring? And it's like, well, if you could tell me what the weather's going to look like, I could tell you. 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were saying March was going to be a really nice, warm growing month. Well, so far it hasn't even appeared. I think we're a lot warmer in February than what we've been in March. So my rye isn't real tall out there. Here it is in 2015, about the time we're ready to plant, May 2nd, and it was about 8 inches tall. But over here on May 13th of 2013, it was a lot cooler spring, so we didn't have nearly the growth. And a lot of that could have had to do with how much growth we got done in the fall too, but all I can say is that the weather has a lot to do with what growth we're going to have. So termination, it's often feared, but we just need to understand the details. Spray when it's warm, when the rye is actively growing or whatever your cover crop is. Use caution if using 32% nitrogen as a carrier. The first few years when we started doing this, I was throwing a little bit of 32% to get a little bit of nitrogen up for that corn crop. But the one year we upped it to 20 gallons per acre to get double the nitrogen, and that burned those leaves before the herbicide actually got to translocate into the roots. Where we tilled that field wasn't an issue, but when we came back and we no-tilled the hillier part of the field, no-tilled great, the rye was all brown, thought we had a good kill, but then when the corn started coming up, the rye started coming back. It had just burned all the foliage off and the roots were still alive, and now it had an extra 70 units of nitrogen and it was growing fast. So we luckily had Roundup Ready corn, just went in there and cleaned it up, not a big deal. So if you are concerned about herbicide interactions and it's your first year, maybe leave them apart, just that way you don't have that issue going ahead. But it is something that you can do, you just have to watch out how many gallons you're putting in there. The other thing I've noticed, as weather warms, I've been able to keep my glyphosate rates about the same. The agronomist tells me the rates to use, and I've often looked at the book and said, well, I could probably cut my rates back quite a bit, but I worry about if it doesn't always work. So I put on a little extra, and I've gotten a good kill. It's always worked well for me. Another thing, with the big booms on these sprayers, there's a lot of line on those booms, and it will take a while for that stronger herbicide rate to get out to the ends of that boom. So what I've done now is when I start spraying these cover crop fields, I'll actually come back and respray that first corner where I started just to make sure I got that killed. The results aren't always as you would expect. And I just throw this in because I hate to have somebody just try it one year and say, well, it was a failure. Well, there's a lot of different things that go into it. This picture here, you can see around the outside of the field is a lot darker green. The farmer had harvested the headlands and he started on the corn before he started his bean harvest, and that had been aerial seeded. So that rye got a lot more sunlight, whereas the main part of the field waited until after the bean harvest, then he came back and harvested that part of the field. So it was all seeded the same day, the same rate, but it's just the amount of sun that cover crop got. And I've also had some issues with aerial seeding. Sometimes it's really spotty. I'll have bare spots out in the field, which probably isn't that big a deal, but if I'm using it for weed control, I want to have really good coverage. So now I just specify that to the airplanes and they fly when it's a lot calmer. So some of the things I've learned about using cover crops to reduce herbicide use. Water hemp, it's a weed, it's going to grow where there's open areas. So as you can see, I've got a few clumps of rye out there, but there's a lot of open spots. Therefore, we have a lot of water hemp growing in there. The other picture just shows what it looks like, the same field that has pre-emerge herbicide applied. And this one has just burn down only, and that one's burn down with the pre-emerge herbicide. So I look at my fields when I get ready to do my chemical plan to determine how much rye I have out there to what my herbicide plan is going to be. If I have a field that looks like this, green fence row to fence row, I'm going to go ahead and plan to use that for my weed control, let that rye grow a little bit taller, and then roll it down. And here's just another couple pictures of rolling the rye. Sometimes here it is when it's still green, otherwise after the beans come up. The rye this last year, it was about waist high. You can still see the corn stalks through the rye straw, whereas when it's 5 feet tall, you don't see any corn stalks for the whole season. That rye lasts a long time. I say it's just like your herbicide rates. If you want to have season-long control, you're going to put the full rate down. If you don't think you need full season, you can roll your rye a lot sooner and just hopefully your crop canopies faster. The economics of cover crops. I started getting these questions because everybody wants to know how can we make this pay. My average cost over the few years that I've been trying it's right at $34 an acre. And what I've done is compared it to our typical tillage program that most of the farmers up in north central Iowa use. Chopping corn stalks or trying to pay for that new chopping corn head, subsoiling, disc ripping, or field cultivator pass. That totals up to $46 an acre. Compare that to my $34 an acre, I'm almost $12 an acre cheaper. So that's just to compare the two programs. And the burn down herbicide is not going to cost that much to burn that cover crop down. I am on Twitter, so if you guys are on Twitter, you can follow me. I've got quite a bit that I talk about cover crops and soil health stuff. So.
Great, thanks, Doug.
You're gonna make me follow him.
I'm gonna make you follow Doug. Let me put these slides on here like this. So Al and I are gonna go back and forth. I'm gonna ask Al questions once he gets his mic on.
I don't have slides.
So here first. So start by introducing yourself and say where you farm.
I'm Al Lingren. I live in northwest Boone County. I farm on 3 sides of Don Williams Lake. I guess that's probably one of the main reasons I got started strip tilling and using cover crops. I guess I started in 2006. 8, I think, or 9, somewhere around there. I strip till the ground, and I use rye and oats. And then I have a mixture of radishes or turnips, depending on the field. I've got cows, so I like to graze my stuff in the fall, which works out very good for cattle people. I guess another reason I wanted to use cover crops is I paid good money for my ground. I didn't want it to wash into the lake or see it blown away. I didn't want to lose my nitrates or my phosphorus. Those cost a lot of money. As far as issues with them, the only issues I've had was not enough moisture in the fall to get them going. Rye will come back in the spring. They'll surprise you. You think it's gone, dead. And then late February or early March, it'll be green and growing good.
So at harvest time, how do you decide which fields you're going to target and what's your seeding method?
I try to harvest the fields around home first to turn the cows out. So then I have put cover crops in with drills and fertilizer buggies and herd them in. And I didn't like that because you had to wait till after harvest. And then it didn't seem like I got enough growing time for the cows. So then I got a co-op to come in with fertilizer buggy, and we mixed the stuff in with liquid molasses and spread it as soon as the beans started shrinking. But then I found an airplane that will put oats on, so I do everything with an airplane now so I can get everything done before. As soon as the plants start maturing and dropping leaves is when I want to get that cover crop going. So it's not laying there too long. And it's there soon enough so as soon as it gets sunlight, it can start growing. And the leaves fall on there and that's like a mat. Just a perfect mat for that seed. Just doesn't take much moisture, just enough to get it going. And it's usually pretty good.
And so how do you know when you should put your cows out on it in the fall?
As soon as I'm tired of looking at them. I don't wait for it to grow.
Like within a week?
No.
Okay.
As soon as I'm done combining, they're out the gate.
So 3 to 4 weeks.
There's enough acres there that there's plenty of time for growth everywhere. So, yeah.
And how short is it going into winter time? Are they on it all winter?
Well, in the bean stubble, I have oats because I don't use rye because I don't want to plant corn into rye. Yes, I don't know why. I just don't want to. So the oats did pretty good this fall. They got probably this tall and green as a gourd. And I think it was late November before they froze, finally killed off, but there wasn't much left. The cows ate most of them down. So the rye down at my dad's, it was put on the same time, but that was the last field I combined, so it didn't get a lot of sunlight, so there wasn't a lot of growth there, and they kind of kept up with it down there. Right now, looking at it yesterday, it was about this tall and green, but not real thick, but I'm guessing in a couple of weeks it'll be a lot different. We'll get some more heat. But for cow people, the cover crops work great. Not only for the soil, but for the cows also. There's a lot of feed value out there for livestock.
So are they on it all winter long on the rye, or do you take them off and then put them back on in the spring?
As long as there's, some years they've gone out all the way till they start calving the 1st of March. It depends on the weather. If it's snowy, you got to go through 3 feet of snow, they ain't going to go out there. But yeah, you can graze it all winter long, as long as it's not covered up with snow.
Are you adding extra feed out there also?
Pardon me?
Are they getting extra hay out in the field also, or are they just on the stalks and the cover crops?
If it's rye and it's good, they'll eat very little hay up in the yard. So it does make a big difference.
So then are they calving on it in the spring also?
No, I bring them up in the yard to calve in case they have problems or anything. And for coyote reasons, I guess.
So then the rye growth from March 1st, when they come off to start calving until you go to soybeans, what's that look like? What's your management?
Basically, after they have calves, they never get back out to the field, so.
Okay.
But on the rye, I'm gonna be planting beans into the rye. And if the rye is this tall, I've got my strips made, so all I gotta do is go plant. I'm not worried about terminating my rye before I plant. Because it seems I've done it as much as a week after I planted.
Terminated the rye?
Because of the weather.
Okay.
I don't want to do it too early. It's got to be warm, preferably 80 degrees when you terminate that stuff. Otherwise, you can kill it, but it'll take forever. And that kind of makes me nervous that it would die. But you plant those beans in that 7-inch strip, and like Doug says, that strip is just like spring plowing. It's so mellow. You step in it, you go down about 4 inches. And those beans just take off. That rye slowly dying, and the beans just seem to come up. It just kind of seems like a good thing there. And as far as the corn, I know you got to terminate the rye at least 2 weeks before you plant. Otherwise, it can affect the yield a little bit. Is that what you?
Depends on your nitrogen program, but
Okay, but I mean,
it's good to be
you can.
cautious. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's your herbicide program for killing the rye
I just
with?
use glyphosate,
Okay.
and it's worked good so far.
Do you have to come back with a post or do any, or is it, you're just doing the burn down?
I just do the burn down, and I don't do any pre on those fields. And then later, I'll come back with another shot of glyphosate. So far, that's worked. As far as weeds, it's done a very good job of weed suppression. I guess I had a few problems with mare's tail and giant ragweed. But this last year, I didn't see that problem. I think it's kind of worked through all those issues.
So then you've got the soybeans coming through the rye, like the picture Doug showed, and then if you're gonna fly on, you'd be flying on oats that fall into
Correct.
standing soybeans. So Doug mentioned that rye residue might cause a issue with the establishment of the fall cover. Have you seen any issues?
I don't bend mine over. It just kind of slowly deteriorates all the way down, so there's never an issue with. I don't have that issue with it.
So your fall aerial seeded oats, fine,
Correct.
as long as there's moisture.
Correct.
So what's the biggest challenge with termination that you see your neighbors might face? Who either don't have cows or maybe, I don't know, aren't as comfortable with rye ahead of soybeans, for example, or even rye ahead of corn? What's a challenge?
As far as burning it down,
Maybe.
would be the weather. Because, like I say, there's some springs when it's cold and wet, you just wonder if you're ever going to get killed. You always get that 1 day or 2 days that it works out good. So, I guess the cost factor would be the only thing that I would think would deter people from doing it. But like Doug pointed out, when I strip till, I make one pass through the field in my cover crop. I don't use 4 rates of chemicals anymore. I just don't have the weed pressure I used to have. So. And as far as planting into those strips, I can be in the field a day or two before my neighbors if I want to. But I like to wait till it's good and warm.
To kill the rye.
To
kill the rye.
Plant.
Oh, to plant, I see.
Yeah.
And when are you making the strips? Is that
Usually
in the fall?
if I can,
Okay.
so that, because it floats it up a little bit, and then by spring it's kind of settled down. It makes a perfect seed bed. But strip till and cover crops go together.
Is there a way to do, just one last question, is there a way to do cover crops with full tillage?
Yeah, there's a way to do everything. Yeah, that wouldn't be any problem. You can mechanically terminate it that way if you, instead of spraying, so.
And then plant beans or something.
And then if you had oats, winter, kill that.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask Doug, how many years have you used hairy veg?
Just this last year was my first year, so.
Okay, because I talked to a guy that had a Hagee, and he said it didn't work because it needed to be covered up like with a drill or something.
And I think last year we just had enough rain to maybe get it established, I don't know.
It did come up?
Yeah.
How tall did it get?
It lays down, but if you stand it up, it was probably 16 inches tall.
Oh, really?
So it's with as green as it was kind of hard to see it out there, but if you're out walking through it, you can find it. Now, I don't know, what percentage of it was successful, but at least it was out there, so.
Did you have radishes with that then, or?
Rape.
If
Great.
the hairy veg is this tall and you have radishes out there, is the radishes going to be getting nitrogen for that, or?
Sure, so when the radishes break, have you used radishes? Or you've used turnips?
Both.
Yeah, so in the spring when you start to smell them, in the spring when they're starting to break down, I'm assuming they're stinky on your farm.
Mine usually don't get big enough.
Oh, because the cows are eating
If
them.
I put it on after silage or seed corn, then it's probably big enough. But yeah, I can't. They're usually about this tall when I combine.
Mhm.
The bean head just goes over them, but, they slowly grow, but they never get big enough.
So a decent sized radish can have 240 pounds of nitrogen in it.
Pardon me?
A decent sized radish, like this big, can have 200 plus pounds of nitrogen in it, and it's available very quickly. So it's flushing too much nitrogen early on, like in early April. But we usually don't have radishes that big. They're usually pencil sized, like what you said.
Yeah.
So that's like maybe 40 pounds. It's much smaller.
So is that hairy vetch, is that adding to that, or?
So the hairy vetch nitrogen would be available more like probably end of June in a no-till system. It'll be held by the plant. So one last take home on termination for the crowd on things that you've learned over these years with it.
Just wait for the perfect day, because if you're in a cold day, you're gonna, I've had it be this tall, and it'll be yellow for a couple weeks, yellow, and then finally brown after 3 or 4 weeks. But it dies, but sunny and 80 degrees is absolutely the best for that, because it's really growing then, and that's what you want, is a good growth.
Great, well, let's thank Al. Okay, Steve. So our last presenter, Steve Berger, and I'll have him go ahead and introduce himself. Oh, yeah, yep, I'll turn this off. I'll give you a 5 minutes.
Okay, great. About 15 after. Let's see. What's the slides here? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Steve Berger. I farm a little bit farther south than these guys. I'm down in Washington County, and that's about 15 miles south of Interstate 80. So it's quite different throughout Iowa, as you know, as you travel from south to north, east to west. And so what Doug experiences up in Humboldt County and Al in Boone County may be a little different in my area. But we got started no-tilling cover crop back in the 1970s, many, many years ago, and never really got away from it. And we got involved to stop the soybean, or to stop the erosion on the C&D slopes with soybeans. We were in a corn bean rotation, and we just wanted to get rid of the soil erosion. It wasn't about water quality in those days. It was just about the sedimentation, and our terraces were filling up, and we couldn't have that. And so that's why we got started. And it was really from the leadership from Extension Service, the Soil Conservation Service, SCS in those days. Now it's NRCS. And we had really good buy-in from the retailers in Washington County. And no-till was pretty much adopted, back in the 70s. A lot of conservation going on. And so it was kind of a natural thing. We learned a lot through the last 30 to 40 years, but what we really want to do is, what you see in this picture is we want to raise really good corn, really good soybeans, produce high yields, economic yields, but high yields, but we also want to take care of the soil. Now it's about water quality, and so This, if I had one slide to show, it would probably be this. We may have a potential 300 bushel corn there. We can keep up with the neighbors, but we can also take a 3 or 4 inch or a 6 inch rain. I can't tell you how many 6 inch rains we've had in the last 3 years, and I think I could hold this field together. And so I think it can be a win-win situation here. And so I like to see the synergy of it, of the cover crops. And so again, I'm all about producing yield. We do not want to take second place to anybody in growing crops. And I think if you want to endeavor the cover crops or the strip tilling or any type of conservation practice, when you go out and talk to farmers, they're pretty much production oriented. And the good news is this works. This system works, and I actually think it is a niche. I feel it is a niche in our farm with the cover crops. I think our yields are increasing through time. Now it takes some time to do this. But we're running about 25% ahead of the county average in corn yields and about 13 to 15% in soybean yields. We averaged 254 last year in corn on about 1,500 acres of corn and about 70 bushels on beans. And so we feel that we can track and compete very well, in the no-till cover crop arena. And my philosophy is, we start with no-till and then we follow it up with cover crops. And then when you start to no-till and cover crop over time, everything changes below your feet. The microbial, you change the whole community. And so until you start to do that over time, you don't really get the appreciation of what's going on, the biology that's, happening in the fields. And then the microbial increase also fuels this better, healthier soils, which in turn gets healthier crops. And to go from the no-till to the crops from top to bottom, you just can't do it in 1 year, and you're one and done. You got cost share, and I'm going to take it this year, and next year I don't, I'm done. Now, once you start no-tilling or strip tilling, or just, I say, if you're out there tilling 30 times, till 29. Just start cutting it back, until you're comfortable with it, because we don't want to set anybody up for a failure. But anyway, so that's kind of my philosophy from the start. Start no-tilling. If you're not no-tilling now, I would start no-tilling and maybe add the cover crops down the road. I think that might be a good plan. This is a slide that PFI put together, Practical Farmers of Iowa, Sarah Carlson. I pulled this off the Pioneer DuPont website. This is showing a corn and soybean following a cereal rye, corn and soybean yields response to cereal rye. And on the y-axis, you can see the yield increase or decrease in this case. And across the x-axis is by year by field. So you can see some fields have experienced up to 25 bushel loss, and some have, we do have an increase. And so if you look on the right-hand side, the same with the soybeans. I think it was a four-year yield trial. And in the soybeans, you'll notice there isn't quite as much of a yield loss there as there is in corn. So, kind of think, why is that? Well, possibly nitrogen. Possibly corn is more sensitive to stand than what soybeans are, and so there are some differences between crops, and I would also say that maybe if you wanted to get started into the cover cropping, maybe suggest, starting with soybeans. But so I think we can be in the upper right on both of those charts. I like to be above that zero line. I like to be increasing my yields, and we'll take a look and see what some of the management strategies there. Of course, the red in the corn represents the yield loss with corn following cereal rye. Beans, you don't see quite the area, and so we know that. Any farmer will tell you that it's easier to no-till and cover crop, soybeans following cereal rye. And I am mentioning cereal rye because that's exclusively what we use for our cover crop. I don't have a lot of others. I've used some oats, I've used some sorghum Sudan grass, and so we're challenged, and we're trying to find, other cover crop mixtures, to add to the operation. But so anyway, this is what we're seeing following rye. So why are the yields reduced in corn, and why are they reduced in soybeans? But let's look maybe at the corn, and I'll go to Farm Bureau church meetings, I'll be at machinery shows, and I'll have farmers come up to me and say, God, Steve, I did what you did. I sat out there and I listened to you talk about this, and I lost 40 bushels an acre with my corn following rye, and I'm never going to do it again. 40, or 25 or something. I had a train wreck. My neighbors were giving me heck about it. It looked terrible. And they were telling the truth. I believe them. I take them at their word, and I kind of go on. I said, geez, I wonder how that happened. And so over the years, I think I kind of narrowed it down to 4 areas I think I'd work on. I think it's a nitrogen management issue. I think it's your corn planter. Insects will be a small part of it, maybe 3 to 5% of your yield. And then I think that 4th one's a big thing. I think it takes a lot of time to change these soils over to get the microbial process going. Remember in that first slide where I said you start with a no-till, kind of go through to the cover crops, the microbial, and it feeds the soil, then you get really good crops. You know, and I think that kind of takes some time to get that done. And so that's why I think time's a big factor there. And that's kind of a hard one to prove, but I don't think I can have my neighbor across the road get started next year and he's going to quite see the same thing, you know. And so first one we're going to look at is nitrogen. So we talk about carbon-nitrogen ratios. It's a little hard to see that chart on the right, but it just kind of shows some typical C to N ratios from like sawdust all the way down to the microbial level. And you look where the ideal carbon to nitrogen ratios would be for growing corn, and nitrogen uptake would be in that 25 to 1, 20 to 1. And so that's where we want to be, to where that that nitrogen can start to be mineralized and go over into, so it can be taken up with the, nitrogen can be taken up in the corn crop. And what happens is when we no-till and we cover crop, we have a lot of residues out there. And so that excites the microbial base, and then they start to try to reduce that, decay that straw out there that we have in the fields, and they're going to take nitrogen to do that. And they're going to temporarily take that nitrogen away from the corn, and the corn's going to go yellow, as in this picture. This is kind of a simulated example of carbon-nitrogen ratio issues where this was on a floodplain. The yellow corn in the bottom half was basically a beachfront that dropped a lot of stalks, and then the river receded. If you turn around, there's nothing behind that camera. And so that was that corn in the bottom looked like the corn on the top, except there's just a lot more residue there to be decayed. And so those microbes are going nuts, and they're stealing that nitrogen from the corn to reduce that stalk. So that's carbon-nitrogen ratio. So it's a nitrogen-carbon interaction. And so we're going to have to kind of learn how to maybe spoon feed that nitrogen at different rates and different methods. Picture of a neighbor's no-till field, sometimes no-till. I think he knifed in some anhydrous. I don't know what amount, but I'm sure there's enough out there to grow that crop. But that looks like a typical field like what we used to have, not a very impressive one. You sure want that for your neighbor to see. And you can buy in 2 weeks, you know, that corn, it's yellow, is going to reach that nitrogen in those knife tracks, 15-inch over 30-inch rows, and it'll green up, but we're growing uneven, and we've also experienced a yield loss by this point. And so that's, and we had a lot of this in the early days, you know, trying to learn how in the no-till, this is no-till, not even cover crops, and we're having this problem. So a lot of what I say about in the cover crop management system, I think it could be followed in the no-till as well. If I turn 180 degrees into the north, that's a field of corn that's just perfect green. It's got a perfect stand. That field hasn't been tilled in, I don't know, 25 or 30 years, and that's had a cover crop on it. And the cover crop is already senescent, it's gone, but that's a cover crop. I mean, just, you see 2 different management systems there. I don't know what this field averaged, but that was a 255 average, I think about 3 or 4 years ago on a 100-acre field. And that was no tillage at all, and it was planted into a cover crop. This field here was a surface applied manure. We had ammonium sulfate on this. We had about 4 or 5 trips spoon feeding the nitrogen, surface applied, so that corn could readily pick that up. And there was no tillage effect from the knife. So when you're planting corn, you're not going in and out of different, the seed is seeing all the same thing, you know, whereas a lot of times you're planting through knife tracks and anhydrous, that seed's not seeing the same thing. It germinates at different times and you grow uneven. And so much more even field than what this one was here. And so one taken this spring, I didn't intend to take this, but a seed company guy showed up and took this picture. In the very top is a pretty nice field of corn. It looks really, really, really even. And then field right there in the middle, a lot of yellow to it, neighbor's field. And then the one in the bottom, another one looks really good. And these are all 3 cover crop fields. That field there went yellow, in the middle went yellow pretty early in the spring, or pretty early in the summer. And it was a nitrogen issue going on. And we didn't take the picture for the nitrogen, but I happened to see that. There again, that's a nitrogen issue going on there. And so that bottom field is in a 70 CSR field or less. I think it's in the 60s. That averaged 261 dry. on the C and D slopes. You can raise some really good corn. You wouldn't believe it. And so we're looking at how we apply our nitrogen. Visualize this as a clock, maybe starting in the 1 o'clock position, where we're going to start in the fall with ammonium sulfate, maybe come back with a little bit of turkey manure. We have sources of turkey manure. We grow a lot of hogs in our farm, so we have access to swine manure. And then we're going to come back in the spring. We're about the 5 o'clock position. We're going to come back and do some more ammonium sulfate. Now, we spread ours yesterday. We did some urea in some fields, and so we're coming back with ammonium sulfate the second time. We're going to start, we got about 400 or 500 acres of manure to get spread yet on corn, and so we're going to surface apply that manure. You know, they might even start to get, where we get rain, you know, so we're trying to time this ahead of the rain. And then we're going to come back when I terminate that rye. Sometimes I put some nitrogen in with my burn down, sometimes I don't, so that where you see the sprayer in the field, that could be like a weed and feed system. And then we come back and plant. I run some nitrogen on the corn planter. I do have some pop-up fertilizer, and then we come back and side dress. I don't do those to every field every year, but I have options I can use, you know, and if we're getting a lot of rain and we're losing nitrogen, then I can put it on in the side dress. In a situation right now where I don't think we've lost a lot of nitrogen, you know, we may pull our nitrogen budgets back, you know, so we're able to make a lot of adaptations. Okay, so that's the nitrogen. That's probably one of the most important things. The second thing is getting your corn planters set right. Now, I don't know how many farmers we have in here, so we won't go through a planter clinic, but just suffice it to say, getting your corn planter set up is pretty important. You know, you could put a clinic on, or a whole day clinic on how to, you know, get a planter set up, and we've got ours in now, making some changes, and there's about 15 or 20 different changes on there. Some are very, very minor, and some are major. The ones I would say are the most important would be the row cleaner on there. If you just wanted to do one thing, get a row cleaner on there to manage your residue. Would be the...
You should point out to some people the row cleaners, maybe not everybody understands.
Yeah, right here. There's your row cleaner. I will never get through this if I stop and do that, but no, we do a lot of things. Add the nitrogen. We're dribbling the nitrogen here. We've got the heat and seed firmers on. We've got the reduced inner diameter depth wheel tires. We've got the spike closing wheels, the drag change, and all those, and they're all oriented for our farm and how our operation works. What it comes down to is this basic seed to soil contact and how that seed imbibes like 30% of its weight, you know, in with moisture. And that might take a different setup, but it's basically seed to soil contact and even emergence, and that gets you yield. And that might be a different combination to what you do in your planter. We found this works pretty well in our area. It's pretty much a standard setup. That's what it's like going through the field. I put this more in just to show you some rye that's been sprayed early in Senes. We do a lot of planting green rye into corn. That's what it looks like behind the planter. That rye was terminated about a day ahead. Soybeans is pretty much a standard operating procedure. This rye is headed out as a fairly short rye. We've had some as tall as what Doug's has been to, where they had to have the Hagee booms up, you know, about 6 feet in the air to spray it. But that's a real conservation thing, but it's also really good weed control, especially when you get the Palmer Amaranth coming in here. It can be really, really good weed control. And so here we're actually drilling soybeans. All our beans are produced for seed production for various companies for the last 50 years. So everything's produced for seed. Beans love to come up in the residue. That's not a problem at all. We're comparing two planters here. One's a plot planter that come in and planted an acre of corn. We planted around it. I just want you to see the difference. That's the plot planter there. That's the stand that they got. We planted these fields within an hour of each other with my planter and a plot planter. And now you can see the difference, about halfway up. You can see there's only about one plant on my planter that's out of place, and it's probably a germination one. I had poor germ on one. But you can see how bare that is up there on top. That's just the difference in the corn planter. And you don't get you don't get a chance to see that a lot. Left to right, you can see the difference there. Whoops. Just the difference in my planter on the left, the plot planter on the right. So you can see how some farmers can experience some frustration, if they don't have it. This is what we want to have. We want I think there's about 35 to 36,000 plants up evenly growing there. That was actually planted into green rye, sprayed the day of. Okay, so that's the corn planter. We talked about the nitrogen, the planter. The other thing is the insects. When you plant green rye, you're going to attract some armyworms, you're going to attract cutworm moths, and when you senesce that rye, terminate that rye, it's going to try to find something green. And so just use your integrated pest management, go out and scout, look for armyworms. We have a lot of cutworms, a lot of seed attacking insects with all the manures. And so we do use some generic or capture some bifenthrin, in furrow, and also spray when we do it. So it's fairly cheap to do that. So that's the insects. Third thing, the last thing is the time, and that's a really hard thing to talk about. And if you try to put some numbers to it, Jim Horman at Ohio State University has basically said, it takes, if you're in a no-till situation, it might take 7 to 9 years to get that soil, the microbial action working. But if you can add a cover crop to it, it might speed it up maybe 2 to 4 years change, and that, I don't know how much research was put into that, but I kind of agree with that. As we rent farms and we see farms come in and out, that's about what it takes. And so it's not a one and done thing. And once you get started, just stick with it because it'll keep getting better. That was the first picture we ever, of our first no-till experience back in the 1970s. That was a brand new Kinsey planter with John Deere units on that planter. Bought that from John Kinzenbaugh himself. And we put that planter in the back of our grain truck, brought it home, and put it together in our shop. And that's how I was our very first no-till planter. In those days, we had fluted coulters in the front. We don't do that anymore. There were no road cleaners. We didn't know what a road cleaner was for another 15 years on those planters, And so as we learned how to, and actually my first cover crop was, or my first no-till was cover crop. And that was before Roundup was registered. We used paraquat, is what they call it in those days. The active ingredient gramoxone. So, it takes time, and that field hasn't been tilled since, so it'll be about 39 years this year of continuous no-till. A soil organic map here of a 2.5 acre grid soil test. This shows these numbers are the organic matter in our soils typical to the southern drift plain. The sandy spots are in the low 1s, the 2s. That 4-7 here in that corner there, that's an old barn that hadn't been there for 30 years. It still shows up there. If you look all the way over to the right, you kind of see a dark line there. That's the fence row. So I had them probe the fence row. And so you can see the organic matters. And I've had them up to 7% different times. They're just roughly about twice of what they are in the field. So when you hear someone talk about we've lost half our potential, we've done it through tilling the soil, oxidizing out the carbon, and through the erosion and so forth, and maybe some tiling too has also reduced that carbon content in the soil. So we definitely can see it. What we learned is when we put yield monitors on the combines in the 90s, and we would farm through that fence row or pull the fence row or rent the farm across the way, that yield monitor would jump 30, 40, 50 bushels an acre, and we just couldn't figure out why. Well, we know now why. That was what Mother Nature gave us, was the perfect soil in that fence row. Some slides taken by my soil scientist, Jason Steele, down in Fairfield, Iowa, sent to Kathy Woida, the state geologist. You can see on the left-hand side our no-till cover crop soils, a lot of pore space. You got really good aggregate stability compared to the one on the right, where there's really no airspace there at all. There's no pore space, there's no structure to that soil. And so this happens over time. And so when we're talking about the time to go from that left-hand picture with some of the biology going on there to the right-hand, you can't do that like in 1 or 2 years, but maybe over a period of 3 to 4 if you had cover crops. That's how we can see it. So I thought that was a good example. Just showing a planter furrow. This is like shooting right behind a planter, taking pictures. You see on the left, in some of the first no-till in the early 70s, using a coulter in front, we were getting an open slot, which is not desirable if you're planting corn. But if you look to the right, that's a cereal rye crop, and that's just flower pot soil. It's very mellow. Not a side-by-side situation, but we see that. If I would go to a farm that's been tilled to one that's been cover cropped, you would see that instantly. So that's basically demonstrating soil structure, and that's what you see there. And so we're looking at nitrogen, your corn planter, insects, and time are kind of the 4 areas that I can see that are management factors that could reduce or increase yield. Now, I never really said anything about how we terminate our cover crop. I got the clock, I'm just getting close here. So we're maybe that should be number 5. I never thought that termination of a cover crop really reduced yields, because I always thought when someone was complaining about their yields, I said, well, I assume they got their rye killed, you know. But maybe not. Maybe there are some issues here. So I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit about termination here. Here we're using glyphosate yet. We may consider going to a gramoxone, a paraquat maybe, instead of using Roundup. And so we started off in the early days of terminating our cover crop, maybe around the 1st of April, you know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ahead of planting. Well, in those days, we started on April 20th or the 25th. Well, now as the weather changes, we're starting to plant much earlier. It seems like it can go from cold to hot just almost instantly. The one thing we do on our farm is we never plant late. I mean, if it's time to plant corn, we're in the field, period. We do not delay planting, because that's a big yield factor there. And so as our termination and our planting are coming together just naturally, and what we're finding out, it doesn't make a lot of difference. It's all these other factors of making sure that you have your nitrogen there, that corn's not short, you've got the insects controlled, that you've got that planter set so you can get perfect seed spacing and emergence. And so we don't think that makes a lot of difference. And so, you know, we have done both. We've terminated rye, you know, maybe a week or 2 ahead of the planter. Maybe we had that opportunity because if it was nice and warm, where we come back on the right-hand side, like last year, we went from very cold to just hot over the weekend. Planters were going out Monday, and so we decided to also, but we didn't have our rye terminated. So what? And so we sprayed that. That field was around 250 average on that right-hand picture. And so we don't think that makes a lot of difference. Yeah, there's a picture there. And so, just to wrap up the last few slides, so what's going to happen here in the next 3 to 4 weeks? It's action time, you know, and if you ask me when I'm going to terminate my cover crops, I don't know. I really don't have a feel for it yet, because we may have a foot of snow yet. And if I give you the perfect plan, you know, so I'm just day by day, and so I just copied the NOAA maps for whatever they're worth 30 days out, you know, maybe not worth a lot, but in my area, I don't have a lot of snow. In southern Iowa, we didn't have a lot of snow. So we're going to be warmer and drier, obviously. Looks like we could be just about average rain. It looks like they're going to be wetter north. Maybe the drought is moving in from the south. Who knows, you know. And so I'm not thinking we're going to have much of a delay in planting this year. But as sure as I say that, you know, it could change. We do have a weather station on our farm. This is one that Elwin Taylor helped me set up. And so we got this in the Iowa Mesonet. And so I watch it close. This is the 4-inch soil temperatures this morning. Mine's the 42 right here in the very northwest corner of Washington County. And so you can look up way up in northwest Iowa, probably has snow packed, and they're going to get more rain, you know, and so their weather is far different. If you go to Scott County, it looks like they're at 49 degrees. They could plant corn and start to have it emerge. And so for me, it's very much a day-by-day situation. Looking at the calendar, Easter's on the 16th this year on a Sunday, Easter Sunday. And so if you're just asking me now, I'm thinking there'll be some farmers, maybe in the 15th, we'd like to get started. And that means I probably won't start terminating my rye till this week at the very earliest. I probably won't start much more than a week ahead. And we'll just see whether I throw any nitrogen in when I spray. And I'm not worried about that 2 or 3 week window. And so remember, you know, that rye is like a solar panel. We want to maximize the growth of that rye. We've got all that money we spent on getting that rye planted and purchasing the seed. Let's maximize that growth, but we also want to maximize corn yield too. And so we've got 2 things we're trying to do there. And so what we're finding is that, you know, if we manage these 4 things really well, it'll take care of itself. And that is my information. Went through it really fast. I could go on for hours and hours. But we do have a lot of visitors on the farm. Just about every day there's people coming into our shop looking at stuff. Best way to do is just come down, walk the fields, come in unannounced, talk to my neighbors. You know, that's the best way to learn, you know. And so we're just south of Iowa City, about 20 miles down Washington County. So thank you, sir, and I'll turn it back to you. So
Let's thank All right, right, so let's get some questions, and I'll just repeat them. So go ahead, Kevin, but don't ask me a crop insurance question.
No,
Okay.
fine. That was over.
Okay, good.
All three of you made the comment you use glyphosate as a burn down. What rate are you using?
Okay. Be close to the mic.
Oh, and a 4-pound glyphosate, a quart, 32 ounces.
That's the same that I use.
And I said I've used a little higher, so upper 40s.
Yeah, right here.
Nice talk, that's very beneficial information. I just want to know why, with all the advantages you said and you brought up, why the rate of cover crop is under 3% in Iowa? What is the problem that the farmers are not?
So what's our barrier to cover crops in Iowa if we're at only 2.6% of the corn soybean acres? Doug?
Mostly it's just people don't like change. It's hard to change what you know you've always done.
Yeah, I think that's it, and I think a lot of them look at the bottom line, they see an extra cost, and they don't want that, they don't see the benefit down the road.
Yeah, people aren't used to change, and if my neighbors would say we can't do it down here because it's just too cold and stuff, then I say, well, Doug's doing it up in Humboldt County. And I always tell them to look north, look to Minnesota. They're doing it up there. Anything that works in Minnesota will surely work in southern Iowa. And so I think change is a big thing. Farmers just don't want to do it.
Yeah, Jean?
Particularly for Al, had you been doing strip till very long before you started the cover crop?
No, I
Had you been
started those
using
in the
strip
same
till?
year.
Go ahead.
I started both of them the same year. It was kind of a, I'm on the Boone County Water and Soil Board Commissioner, and I thought, I better start doing this stuff. So.
Is that a good example?
Yeah.
Yeah, right here.
I'm wondering if either of you two experienced that dip in yield that
Steve?
was talking about. Yeah.
Yield changes?
I've never done a side-by-side, and I guess that's the hardest part is how to really measure your yields, but I've talked to my neighbors and I'm happy with my yields are. I think they're very comparable to my neighbors, so I think a lot of it's just the management that goes along with that.
I have never seen any soil or any yield drag at all, if not maybe a little better.
On yield, it just comes down to weight leaving the field, pounds of corn, pounds of soybeans. And so we focus very much on, you've got to have perfect stands. That means just every seed has to grow, and then you have to maximize, the evenness of growth. And that goes back to those 4 factors. And I think for farmers that have problems with the no-till cover crops, you can go back and you can figure that out. Now, I think the one thing I didn't even talk about today because of time is the mycorrhiza fungi. That is a big, big deal. The arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi, I'm sure you've talked about it here and know about it. But the only way that you can keep that proliferated is not tilling the soil. And so what happens is, that mycorrhiza fungi is going to grow out maybe 100 times the length of your corn roots, and it's got a symbiotic relationship. It's going to feed off that corn root, and that corn's going to feed off of it. And it's basically going to bring that nitrogen and phosphorus back in. So it's basically made your root system larger. And if you, like Wendy Tahari is on a lot of YouTube. She was with the NRCS, I think in Mandan, South Dakota. Now she's on her own, I think. But really good YouTubes on arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi. And the only way you get that is if you quit tilling the soil. You just got to absolutely stop tilling the soil. And she shows around a 25% increase in yields on vegetable crops. I don't think they're testing corn and soybeans, but I'll bet you there's a real niche there. That's why I'm kind of excited about, and we've gone to surface applications on a lot of things that we just very neurotic about. We just do not till that soil, and it's because of the mycorrhiza fungi.
More questions? Yeah, here.
Do any of you plant cover crops on rented ground, and how does it affect your rental agreement?
I guess most of my ground is rented, and I do plant cover crops on the rented ground. I do somewhat look at the lease. A lot of it has to do with what the price of the lease is, and if it's a really high rent, that I'm worried that it might be something that I would have to cut. I may not spend the extra money on that, but if I've got a really good relationship with that landlord and I think it's going to be a long-term lease, then I'm going to go ahead and do that. So, like I said, I've got most of my acres covered, working on expanding that yet.
I've got, excuse me, most of my landlords that I use the cover crops on work with me on my rent because it does cost a little more to put it in and terminate it. But when they see the results, they like it, they don't want me to stop using cover crops.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. We own most of our ground, but we do have a few landlords, and they've been very long-term relationships. And I know we've never even talked to them about it, I guess, in the last 40 years. So we just do what we do, and they like seeing it too. They love it. It's, this time of year, it's just beautiful green. You know, just so pretty going up and down the road. So.
All right, one more question? Yeah, in the back.
I was just curious, when we look at the dollar amount that when you're looking at
Mainly, I guess the question was, what do you look at for dollar amount, whether you do or don't do the cover crops? I look at just the overall cost, I guess, on my farm operation. I don't basically look at each farm on its own, but I just kind of look at my overall cost and stuff, and I'm trying to, you know, still ensure a profit. If there's cost share dollars out there, I try to use those while I can and stuff. So, but yeah, it's just kind of, I think there's the benefits out there, and it is an extra cost, but I think the benefits are going to come if you're patient enough.
What he said.
Yeah, what he said too. The other thing I want to mention, and this is the last thing, I'll be quiet. I didn't put the slide set in of when I've done a lot of photos of when comparing fields that have been no-till cover cropped, the ones that aren't. I probably got over 100 slides of during the same rain, and with the one aha moment we had, and we started getting these 2-inch rains, and then we get these 3-inch rains, and then 6-inch rains, and with the mycorrhiza fungi and with the glomalin, that sticky protein that holds those soils together, that's what keeps the erosion or stops the erosion. And that's the one thing we really noticed, and it's very noticeable. And so that's the one thing you can't tell the first year, the second year, but after you get into it 3 and 4 and 5 years, you start to see that soil just hold together, and it's just amazing after, well, we've had a 6-inch rain last year. Just go down the road, and that soil just doesn't move. Well, that one there, that was a 3-inch rain. That was a 3-inch rain in April 2012, and that's what's coming off of there. And I didn't show the companion picture, but I got sets of slides where I go back and forth, and boy, that really convinces you. And that's where you get to the landlords; they see that too, and so that helps sell the program. So.